Hey everybody, I've got Josh back with me today. Hi Josh, thanks for coming
Yeah,
on.
yeah, there we go.
I wondered if we could start off, we're going to talk about a few things, but we thought we'd start off with third force and being third force blind because I've had a few people asking me about it, which at first was just one person, but then I got an email from somebody else and it's like, oh, it must be in the air at the moment. People are not quite getting what being third force blind is or why. To me, the third force is the reconciling force of the wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling. But maybe I'll hand over to Josh and let him explain what he sees the third force to be.
Yeah, I'll give it, like I say, give it a shot. Um, I mean, like if people are familiar with some of Gurdjieff's writings and some of his students' writings, then that I guess they'll be familiar with some of the things that like Gurdjieff says about it, or some of his students say about it. Like Ouspensky, or like I remember reading a few books by J.G. Bennett, who's one of Gurdjieff's pupils. And I think he looked into he had some bits about the third force and also the different versions of the triad. Like because you could look at how the three forces, the different ways they can interact. Like you could have like an idea of say the affirming force kind of being first, so to speak, and then the denying force being second, and then the reconciling force being third. But you could also switch the order around. So you could imagine the three forces interacting in different ways, and each of those different ways having a different like quality. So those like the combinations of the three forces produce like six different triads. And so that's just like some reference material people could possibly look into. Like I remember it's a long time ago since I've read it, but I remember finding it quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, like Gurdjieff talks about it quite a bit in his different books, and also in some of the different, like Ouspensky's reported conversations with Gurdjieff. So like the law of three, it's a big player in the work, at least as Gurdjieff presented it. And like in Beelzebub's Tales, he goes into like, the law of three, or like Mazikano, or however you pronounce it. And so he says that it's like one of the, that the law of three and the law of seven are the two kind of major laws in the work, the two most significant laws. I mean, he speaks of other laws, but specifically, yeah, it kind of says the law of three enters into everything. And he kind of like in speaking about it as like Mazikano, he kind of says that it almost speaks about it in one way. He speaks about it. It's like almost like causality. Like he says that through the law of three, one thing can lead to another. So there can be this kind of ongoing like continuity. Also, or he also says that any phenomena, expresses, you could say, the law of three, or is kind of unable to, be produced or appear, like due to the law of three. And like you say, he mentions I think he mentions it in various places, but I think it's like in Beelzebub's Tales, like being a third force blind, and maybe also in like in his recorded conversations with Ouspensky. Like I think in Search of the Miraculous, he says that in one sense he says that the third force is kind of invisible, in the sense that in general we can only be like aware of it through its implications, or through like an inference. Like he says, the two forces we can tend to sort of see, let's say, as manifest, as an appearance in some phenomena. But the third force doesn't tend to appear directly, but it's like you could say it's behind the scenes, and it's what's enabling like, phenomena to appear or to transform. So again, there's all sorts of different examples that you could look at in terms of like how the third force in a given situation is not visible. I mean, one example that comes to mind is the kind of triad of like a mother and a father and a child, you know, like in the kind of sort of normal way of looking at it, the mother and the father come together and have sex, and then they produce this new element, being the child. That's one example of it. So, like, look at it in a sort of linear causal way. Yeah, you've got like traditionally, obviously, the affirming force tends to be related to the masculine, and the passive or the denying force to the feminine. So you've got like the affirming force and the denying force coming together, having an interaction, and then like manifesting this new appearance of the child. And again, yes, the child may be born male or female, but of course you could say, like any child, it's half male and half female, in the sense that the mother and father are equally involved in the creation of the child. So in that sense, you could say, well, the child is, in a way, you could say it's neither male nor female. I mean, it may have one gender, but it's got male and female aspects to it. But it also has something of its own. Like the child has its own. It grows up and has its own character, its own individuality. I mean, it may look more or less like more like its father or more like its mother, or it may have characteristics that are a bit, the way its personality expresses, maybe a bit more like its dad or its mother. But it has its own essence. It has its own individuality. So in that way of looking at it, yeah, the third force is one way of expressing it would be in the child's individuality. It's something different. It's not just a combination of the mother and the father. They come together, but there also has to be some other element that comes into a play to allow the creation of the child. Or you could look at the Trinity of like the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Like the mother and the father come together, but then some other element comes down that actually enables a new life, to be created, to be born. So, like in one way of looking at it, you could see the third force expressing as a new manifestation. The mother and the father come together, and something new is created through this intervention of the third force coming into play. Or there's also ideas that what brings the mother and the father together? What is that? I mean, of course, in modern science, we just talk about the biological drive, to like replicate. But you could say that there's some other element there that brings the two together. And what in some ideas, it's like, I suppose in some religious ideas, it's like there's a soul, let's say, then the child that's like kind of already there and wants to be born. And it's the child's influence, like that brings the mother and the father together, so they come together in order to allow the child to be born, to be manifest, So that's another different way of looking at it, that there's an unseen influence. Again, we can try to like define that. We can give it labels like, a soul that wants to be born, or we could just say it's a biological urge. We can give a name to it, but we don't see that directly. We can see the mother and the father come together, and we could like, if we were watching their relationship from an outside perspective, we might see some spark of connection, when two people kind of meet, and like we talk about falling in love at first sight or something like that, So we could see an expression of that kind of influence, but we don't see it directly. We can have names for it, but we don't see it, but we see its effect. We see the mother and the father being drawn together, and then like, entering into this relationship, and then something being birthed or created through their interaction. So in one sense, you could say it's not just that we're third force blind in the negative sense, as in something like we can awaken, become, we could become more like attuned to the third force, or change how we understand it and participate in it. But also there's something inherent about it that kind of makes it sort of invisible, or, not visible in the same way that the other two forces are. Like again, I think it did such a miraculous good to just say that the third force in a way is never directly manifest or like visible in the same way that the other two forces are. So again, in saying that we're third force blind in the sort of negative connotation, yeah, he's suggesting that we can become, you could say, more aware of it, but we're not in a sense aware of it as a direct like phenomena, but we can become aware of it as an unseen force. We can kind of become sensitive to it, and we can also change how we participate in it. And again, in a lot of his writings, he talks about liberating the third force. Like particularly, I think in Beelzebub's Tales, I think that phrase comes up quite a lot. That the idea is that the third force needs to be liberated, or like a being, an individual, can, you could say, like work on themselves in order to liberate that third force, and that liberation of that third force is what enables transformation. Again, like he says, it's only when the three forces come together that there can be like real transformation or real creativity. You know, like again, he says that if the two kind of forces are just interacting, they tend to cancel each other out, or you just get this kind of like you could almost say like a mechanical situation. Things can go on, but they just kind of repeat themselves, or they go on at a sort of mechanical level. So it's only when the three forces are there that there's this potential for creation, or like in Beelzebub's Tales, he says spiritualization. You know, he says that the centers or the brains need to be spiritualized, and that's like, you know, that's what is his word for the transformation. You know, the centers or the brains can be spiritualized through the three forces, you know, coming to interact, or particularly the third force being liberated in the brains or in each brain or in each of the centers. And that he often links that to individuality. You know, like you could say that a being kind of automatically has an affirming and a denying part of their nature. You know, like he often talks about the body as being like an expression or a vehicle for the denying force, you know. And you could look at like maybe the mind, or what we tend to relate to our consciousness and our awareness, is kind of like the affirming force. You know, so again, like a lot of the exercises he talks about are like going against the body, you know, like going against this denying side of us by applying, you know, our affirming nature. You know, again, he talks about the head brain as being affirming, and the body or the spinal brain as being denying, and then like the emotional brain is, in that sense, being reconciling or serving for that force, you know. So again, like, yeah, in bringing our affirming side together with our denying side, there's an opportunity there, but it has to be done in a certain way in order to liberate the third force. So like it says, the third force and our connection with it isn't kind of guaranteed, or isn't sort of provided to us automatically in the same way that our connection with the affirming and denying forces are. So that's why he often links it to individuality. It's like the only way that a being can liberate the third force is like individually. You know, it's something that you could say in a way is unique to the individual. I mean, they may come across like exercises or techniques or ideas that are out there, you know, in the marketplace, but in how the person applies them to themselves, it has to be unique in order for there to be real transformation. Or if we're talking about real I or individuality, then of course it's going to be, you know, really unique to the individual, you know. So in that sense, like set methods and practices and techniques, they can serve as material and they can help with certain things, but in terms of this like real liberation of the third force, it has to be, yeah, you know, individual or unique. And that's in a way what gives the space for the individual to do something, you know. If there wasn't any room for like the individual's own influence in their own transformation, then you could say it would just be a mechanical process that everybody would go through the same. There'd be no room for individuality to, like, you know, to contribute to it, or to, like, again, to make something of your own. You know, again, he often talks about like essence or I or real I as something that is really, really your own. You know, it's really each person has something of their own and can develop that. So again, in that sense, the third force is also linked to individuality. You know, and again, like creativity, as we say, that when the three forces come together, there's the opportunity for real creativity. Or like you could look at something like the Enneagram. You know, there's the triangle in the center of the Enneagram. That kind of, again, you could say represents the law of three. And then you've got the kind of hexad, the other figure within the circle, which you could say is the law of seven. And it's the triangle that its points of the triangle correspond to the shocks, you know. So a shock, again, is there's the opportunity there for something to be done. You know, you could say for the exercise of something like will or intention, you know. So they're openings, and that's what in one sense enables things to go different ways. It's the third force that brings opportunity for real creativity, but it also brings the opportunity for hazard and uncertainty. You know, again, the points of shock in the Enneagram, he talks about them as like openings, you know. And if those openings are filled or acted upon in a certain way, then a process or transformation could go one way, and if they're not acted upon, in that way, then it could go a different way. So in that sense, yeah, the third force again is linked to like creativity and the opportunity for a real contribution, and like that brings in uncertainty and hazard.
Do you think also, because I'm totally with you on that, so many people always want to ask, well, what's your experience? And, in olden days, I also wanted to learn from other people and their experience. And then sometimes you get disappointed that, well, I've not done the same thing as that person's done. So I'm really glad you said all that, because everyone is on a unique path, but we can learn from others and what
Yeah.
they did. I think it's quite important to follow biographies and such things, and just, um, you know, can learn from their mistakes or have an idea if you're going in the right direction or whatever. But still, it is all experiential. So it is, like you say, subjective. And that's what true magic is. And this is all really alchemy and alchemical transformation, which is magic.
Yeah, yeah, and like yeah, I mean, again, he talks about it like in Beelzebub's Tales, doesn't he? With the episode with Gordo Hahak, the little, the raven bird scientist. And Beelzebub goes into his chamber and he's doing experiments, isn't he? It's like a hermetically, you know, sealed chamber, and he's doing experiments with the three forces, combining them in different ways. And he does, doesn't he? He does one example of like alchemy, doesn't he? I think he takes, I can't remember what metal it is, might be copper, and like he applies the three forces to it in a different way, and it transforms to like gold, or it goes through different. He shows him that you can transform it into different metals. So again, that's like another classic analogy for alchemy. The idea of like turning a base metal into gold. You could say that's like a physical analogy for inner transformation, inner alchemy. And again, yeah,
That
it
was
says
my
that
favourite chapter when I first ever read Beelzebub's Tales. I was
yeah,
just so drawn to that because I remember that very well. And the sealed, the hermetically sealed room that
yeah,
they put in, there was so much what from having looked at alchemy and magical ways of so
yeah,
much terminology that really rang
yeah,
true for me.
yeah. Yeah, it was one of my favorite episodes too. It's just like very rich, if you're imagining, imagining it goes along. Yeah, it's a very rich, scenario. But like you say, yeah. So there can be like I've talked to a lot of people like in the work, or are interested in it. There can be, a lot of ideas that it's just, you just need to do this exercise, or you just, need to practice like this technique, and you'll get the results. And again, sometimes the way that Gurdjieff speaks about it, the language sometimes that he uses can seem to suggest that, a lot of what he talks about, like the food factory, like take it, or the Enneagram, the way it's spoken about can sometimes, you know, seem to suggest that it's almost like I mean, he does sometimes talk about it as like a science, like the work as a science, and there's these substances, and there's laws that are operating. And if they, if those laws are like obeyed, then you'll get certain results. But in a way, like the science that he's talking about, like inner science, is quite different to outer science.
Mm.
It's in the sense that I mean that like what we talk about as outer science, you could say it's mechanical. And that's one of the limitations of like you could say general science, but it's also one of its advantages. You have those ideas of like set laws, and if you're in this situation and you do this experiment, you'll get this result repeatedly. Like that's the scientific method, and it has a value. For that reason that it can get repeatable results. That's useful in the kind of physical world, but when like we talk about the work, it's more centered on the inner world, like you say, you could say the world of experience, the world of thoughts and feelings. So you could say that because it's centered in a different world, like thoughts and feelings, the science of it is obviously going to be different by nature. The very meaning of the term science, you could say, or alchemy, changes depending on like what realm or what world you're applying it to. you know so like inner science by its very nature or like sometimes he talks about like the science of being or the science of inner alchemy. It's going to be a very different kind of science than outer science, you know. And I mean that in the sense that the kind of laws, if you like, that operate there are going to be different because again, if we just limited it to like you do this set method, you know, this set practice, and you'll get this set result, that would kind of make it mechanical.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Just like predictable, you know. And you could say that that would lose its value or life. You know, like again, material science is great for studying like material objects, and physical sciences has done lots with the body, like, you know, in terms of understanding how it works and being able to like, you know, develop medicines and heal injuries. But when we talk about like, you could say life itself, for example, like the experience of life, you know, that's very hard to be quantized. You know, that's why like the kind of science of brain science or the science of psychology is very different to physical science, you know. When you're talking about people's minds and how they, you know, again, there can be apparent generalities, you know, with human psyche, but again, when you're dealing with a specific individual case, you know, you can't really apply these generalities, you know, like
And it
because
all
of the very
works in time again, like because time, the merciless higher past, people are going to understand certain ideas in different at different time. They're not all going to do it. You know, you don't all learn everything in 6 weeks.
yeah,
Someone might pick it up just like that, but not everybody picks it up quickly. And some people come at it from the work from different angles. So there might be a
yeah,
bit more understanding in one aspect, or someone else might understand the hydrogens better than others. I'm not very scientifically minded, so I find all the
yeah.
hydrogens a bit like numbers.
Yeah, yeah. I just mean in the sense that as soon as we come to try to deal with, let's say, the inner world, like the world of the mind, you know, the emotions, like the inner experiential world, the very because we're dealing with a different kind of world, because the inner world is different to the outer world. You know, if we call the outer world the material world, let's call it that, because it's a different kind of world. Like you say, the kind of science, then, you know, which you know, the kind of work that we can do with it will be of a very different nature. That's what I mean. It's just, I mean, you could say it's living. You know, again, living things are quite different to non-living things. You know, at least apparently in terms of like how they behave. You know, like a human, you'll know. You know, if you as soon as you meet a human, you start like a new person that you haven't met before. And, you know, you start engage with them. It's quite evident that you're not dealing with something in general anyway. You're not dealing with something that's like an inanimate object. You know, you can't just manipulate a person in the same way that you can a physical object, you know. So the same way with like the inner world, if we're talking about the workers mainly being focused on the inner world, then it's again, it's not something that's reducible to a set of laws or a system in the same way that we would talk about some kind of external subject. You know, like I don't know, the science of like being a car mechanic or something like, you know, you could get taught that as a mechanic school, and like, you know, they can learn how to work on cars by following set things that they're set procedures or ways of working that they're taught, you know. But as soon as we come to the inner world, it's very different, you know, it's something because it's living. And you could say again, because we're dealing with our own inner world, you know, if we're working on ourselves. So in that sense, I just mean, yeah, the work can often get taken, you know, or interpreted in a kind of very mechanical fashion. People like just look at it in the same way as they would, let's say, an external science. Say, oh, okay, well, I just need to take on these, learn these steps, and then I just, you know, engage in them, and I'll get certain results, you know. But
I
I
understand
would say,
people want to learn the theories because they feel it's how they've been taught at school, isn't it? You know,
yeah,
you're programmed in a certain way as how to learn something, but you can't learn the Gurdjieff work through a school system way. It's a lot of effort has to be put in, a lot of studying, but not the studying of what we used to do when we were, you know, writing an essay. It's
yeah,
of oneself and working on oneself.
yeah. Again, like you say, you can take, you know, you could read books, you know, you could acquire like, you know, exercises and that kind of material, and you know, you can apply it some way or other. Like, you know, you have to come to terms with that material yourself, you know, like it's how, you know, you process it, you digest it in whichever way, you know, you do as an individual. But yeah, I'm just saying that it's a limited, it's kind of like a very limited way of looking at the work if I'm just approaching it in the same way that I would, you know, like some external subject or some external science. You know, if I'm approaching it in that kind of fashion, you could say that that's kind of, you know, like they talk about in the work, like different worlds. That would be like reduce approaching the work from a lower world, or like say making something that's living, call it a living work, and reducing it to just like, yeah, looking at it as in terms of mechanics or something like that, you know. So yeah, there are certain communal materials, like say you could read what Gurdjieff said and you can, you know, acquire some of these exercises, but they're like, you could say the just the raw materials, you know, and to make something that's really your own in terms of like individuality, well, it's going to require something, a contribution from yourself that's your own. I'm not just talking about, well, yeah, I can come across an exercise, but yeah, obviously I have to, you know, I have to apply it. But I'm talking about that I'd have to apply it in a way that's my own way, you know? Again, like, because if you take the idea of an exercise and just equate it with like a physical exercise, like sit-ups or something, well, yeah, of course, if you want to get a six pack, you have to do some sit-ups. And anybody that, generally speaking, anybody that does the sit-ups will get a six pack. But again, with the exercises that we're talking about are not, in a way, they're not the same. Although we're not talking about something that operates in the same way as that, you know. We're talking about something that you need to,
Like nurture.
yeah, in your own way, you
Mm.
know. Yeah, because again, how can you realize or create, you know, something that's unique if, you know, it's like people can have all the techniques, but what they lack is themselves. You know, it's like, I need to, what am I bringing to the table that's my own? What can I, you know, what are my own essence then, you know? And again, that's a lot of what Gurdjieff talks about. Like, generally says that people are mostly just operating at the level of personality, which is like what we gather. It's kind of the external side of our being for dealing with other people and dealing with the physical world. And we, you know, we use the personality to interact with people and, you know, survive and be able to deal with the physical world. But we have this other side of us that he calls us the essence, which he says is kind of our own. And although there are essence types, each individual essence is individual, you could say is kind of unique. And it tends to be that unique side of us that gets shut down, you know, or he talks about like conditioning, you know, from the child. So I mean that as soon as we talk about something that's our own or unique, that immediately puts it onto us.
Hmm.
You know, that they're confronted with a challenge. Then it's like, yeah, I can go to these groups, I can read the books, I could do some of the exercises, but what, you know, what could I bring to the table that's of my own? You know, again, that immediately puts me like in confrontation with myself. I kind of have to, I mean, it sounds strange, but it's like I have to get to know myself and not just in terms of my like behaviors, you know, like how I behave or how I perceive other people, you know, again, like possibly opinions or habits that I might have acquired from my interaction with others, but what is uniquely me, my own, you know, and how can I, like you say, how can I engage with that? How can I, you know, nurture that, you know, or approach like or bring that into the work or bring the work, you know, to that individuality so it feeds it, you know, so it becomes a source of food for it rather than me just like, you know, just taking on these ideas and practicing these techniques as if it's something outside, you know, something outside of myself that, you know, I just take it on then as another, you know, another topic, like another, like, you know, like another topic at school, like maths or something. Or now I'm a mathematician, you know, because I've read the books and I'm doing the exercises, you know.
Right, so I put the light on. It was getting dark. The sun has set. I often try and talk to people about the sun, and I've got a show coming up soon about. I've already recorded about doing the sun exercise that Gurdjieff, Beelzebub says in Gurdjieff, to Hussein in the morning to go out
Yeah.
and sit and watch the sunrise, because that's again the energy coming in on you and working on your lower centers to help you prepare yourself for the day.
Yeah.
And then you can start working upon your higher centers, because at the moment when we're being mechanical, we're just doing the lower centers. And this, from what my understanding, and so I'm hoping you can just speak a bit more on this, is this our chemical transformation is helping us to understand what our lower centers are doing, become aware of how they're working, so that eventually over time we will start connecting with the higher centers.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, like he talks about it, the centers and the brains in different ways, in different places, you know, as is typical of Gurdjieff. But he tends to say that like the higher centers, it's like they're there and already, and he kind of says they don't need to be like developed. But like the problem, as he kind of states it, is that we're not connected with them. And like the reason he gives for that is because the kind of lower centers are in disarray, or disorganized. There aren't Each of them isn't kind of performing their, you could say, intended, natural role. So like you get one of the centers trying to do something that's the job of the other center. You can imagine like a business, I don't know, like a restaurant or something. If the waiter suddenly starts trying to cook the food, he's not trained as a cook, and the cook's suddenly like out there maybe working behind the bar and he's got no experience of it, then the business doesn't run as effectively. So I tend to look at it in that kind of way, that yeah, we have the different centers or the different brains, and you could say that they have they have their own nature, and they have a particular use, or usefulness or talent, like people, like if you get a group of people together, if you've all got just have the same skill set, then that I mean that's useful for that particular skill set, but that you're limited in terms of your options. Then, if you can get a group of people together who all have like a varied range of talents, then you've suddenly got all these options open to you, and there could be a kind of, again, like a creative interaction. If you've got different people sparking ideas, then you can produce something of creative, or something like new, or with a higher quality. So again, yeah, most of the exercises and things that he talks about, the work he says is the bulk of it is aimed for getting the lower centers, to do their own jobs effectively. So like he has exercise, then he, like, again, he talks about the fourth way as the fourth way as opposed to the other three ways that he mentions. And the three ways tend to be more focused on one or other of the centers, you know, like the body center or the emotional center or the mental center. Whereas, I guess his idea with the fourth way is that you can try to work with all of the centers, or develop them, work with them in a balanced way, so that there could be this kind of, like I said, harmonious development, or like be a whole human, not just lopsided in terms of like a really developed mind or a really developed body or a really developed set of emotions. And he tends to say that, each person is sort of unbalanced in their own particular way. Somebody might be more developed intellectually, or with the body, or with the emotions. So I guess part of the development of the lower centers would be, I guess, then trying to recognize your own pros and cons in that way. Like, again, self-observation comes in there, like, observing oneself, and maybe observing like where you've got talents or skill sets and where you haven't, and if you want to work on something that you're lacking in, then it's like trying to find a way to work with each center. Like, again, he gives exercises that you could say like sensing exercises, which you could say are more, and movement, you could say they're more linked to the body, developing the intelligence of the body, developing our like bodily presence, the awareness of the body, you know. And you could look at like dance, or like, different kinds of physical crafts, they're all ways you could say to exercise the body or engage with the body center. And it gives exercises for the emotional center. I mean, you could look at like art or something, perhaps, or poetry, or like you say, maybe getting out into nature. There's different ways that you can work with your emotional center or stimulate it. Like, again, you could say that they each need a kind of food, like obviously the body needs physical food, but in terms of your experience of the body, then it's like the physical brain craves a kind of food, craves a kind of experience, and again, it's finding ways to do that, to satisfy those kind of desires or that hunger, and the same with the mind. There's different ways to exercise mental capacities. It could be like reading certain material, or it could be like pondering over certain ideas, or like again coming up, maybe like maybe writing something yourself, so yeah, there's different ways to work with the different centers, and again, it's in a way it's individual, but again, people can give you generalities. Well, here's like you could do some sensing exercises to work with your body. Here are some exercises that work your mind. But yeah, it's trying to find your own way of working with them that bring you, you could say fulfillment, or like that satisfy you, or bring new insights, new experiences. So again, in that sense, it's kind of individual in terms of finding your own way of working with them.
Well, Gurdjieff used to talk a lot about impressions, didn't he? And going doing things that you wouldn't, well, you would try not to have a mechanical life and repeat things over and over every day. We've got to do different things, go to other places, which I know could be a bit scary for some people. Some people don't like to go to new places, but just go and do it on a nice sunny midday day when the place is busy, just to experience things, isn't it? Or go to a museum
Yeah,
you not normally go to and see things that are different. Um, try and encourage people to do that all the time. I know some
yeah,
people are a bit shy about going out on their own, but
yeah.
then that could be your little aim for the day or something.
Yeah, like you say, like expose it. It's you could say it's all exposing yourself to new kinds of impressions, then new situations that may be unfamiliar, and you may be able to gain something out of your comfort zone, perhaps, and or like again, if looked at his idea, perhaps with his own school that he set up, you know, again, there'd be certain things that some people would like, maybe some of the exercises, maybe somebody really liked the movements, but didn't like, digging a ditch in the garden, So there'd be certain things that you like and you didn't like. So like providing, I suppose the idea with the school is like, yeah, you provide the opportunity for different types of people to engage with different types of things that they may not necessarily be drawn to, or they might have a sort of natural aversion to. But then in exposing them to it, they might find something new of value in it. They might come to like it, or even regardless of whether they like it or not, they might find
Well,
something of value for engaging with it, some kind of new insight or something like that.
that's
But
something
like,
Raj used to talk about, actually, didn't he? Or maybe people talked about Raj talking about it, or things that he had to do at the brewery that he'd never ever thought of doing, hard graft, like you're saying, digging
yeah,
trenches and things. But then, because again, it's difficult to explain it in words, but he knew it did something and energy was created,
yeah,
which
yeah. Like I mean,
sometimes you just can't explain. Sorry, go on.
yeah, or like on a sort of surface level, you could say he was maybe like an intellectual type, and so like he got put to work in the garden, and maybe at first didn't like it, didn't enjoy it, and it's if you haven't done that kind of work before, when you first start doing it, there's suffering involved in it. You have to there's ways of shoveling that use less energy than other ways. What I mean, so you can learn like new techniques and things through doing something that's out of your comfort zone, perhaps. But again, as far as I remember, I think like he came to really love it. Like something in him like loved the kind of, you could say, the vitality, of like working with the soil or working with your body. And like I think again, as soon as like Gurdjieff recognized that he was kind of coming to enjoy it, then he took him out of it and put him on, put you on to work on something else. So again, there's that part of that process is, yeah, getting you could say maybe out of your rut, out of your just like following what you're naturally drawn to, and like exposing you to new situations so you can maybe develop new talents, or learn new things, and also getting, the idea is, I suppose, that it builds a certain ableness in you to deal with different situations. Again, situations that that may grate on you. Again, like his classic thing, like like what
It does
it
not lie.
dislikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, in natural life, we come across this all sorts of situations that will piss us off, or particular kinds of people, and unless we're forced to, unless there's some situation like maybe at my job, I'm forced to work with people that I don't like because it's my job. But in my personal life, then yeah, I'm not going to hang around with people who piss me off because there's no requirement. There's nothing forced on me to do that. So yeah, as another kind of general principle that you can explore that in terms of going against your habits and your preferences, of developing enableness, so that you can deal with situations that you might not like, and also so that you might find out, you learn new things. Like again, there's that idea that in one sense you can't see what kind of habits you have, you can't see what restrictions that you operate under until you kind of in one sense removed from them. you know Again, we tend to think that, I suppose, as people in general, maybe we tend to think that we do know ourselves. I know that I'm this kind of person and not that kind of person. Maybe I know what my preferences are. Obviously, to a certain extent, that's true. But also, there's that big idea that we don't really see ourselves. We don't see ourselves the way that other people see us. So that's part of what, I suppose, a possible value in terms of working with others can be, is that you can get other people's reflections on you. Like somebody may say something about you that could be completely shocking. Like, wow, I didn't know that. That's the impression that I produced to you. So that working with other people can be informative that way, to try to be able to get a new perspective, not on other things, topics and stuff like that, but also on yourself. So that's one of the, I suppose, possible values of working with other people. But again, it's like anything. It's how do I make use of that, individually? Because again, I could go to these, Gurdjieff groups or whatever, some other kind of groups, and engage in all the practices, but I might not really get anything out of it for myself. Like again, that question of what is it in me that's kind of my own or that's unique to me, and how can I connect with that and like nurture that. Again, the idea with like the lower and the higher centers, like in one sense, he's saying that there is a natural intelligence in us, or you could say something like an inner guide. But the question is then, like, how can we connect with that? How can we stimulate that or become receptive to that? Like, if you want, you could say the guides, the higher centers. How can I connect with that in my own way, so that I can receive that kind of guidance, that's going to enable me to, you could say, be me. That's going to, that it's only by coming, you could say, connecting with my own inner guide, that I can find my own way, the way that's my way, as opposed to like just following somebody else's way, off of following these prescribed ways. So again, it's like that. At what point do these practices or these ideas that I come into contact with externally, that are kind of like communal gifts, the things present in the community that I might be able to, engage with, but how can I make it my own, or how can I use them to then get on my own path?
So it's like making because the work is working in us. I think some people think the work is going to be given to you. Well, it kind of is through the books and Gurdjieff's system that he's put into us, but then we have to do it, kind of like what you was just saying then, of observing yourself, seeing what's happening, your reactions and how your responses are. And, but if you're thinking in the way that Gurdjieff says we should be thinking and feeling and moving, or think, the instinctive reactions, over time, the way the system says we should be doing it should start implementing in us.
Yeah, I think it's like, again, it's like you could look at it in terms of different worlds, or like he has this idea of like, exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric, like, or like you could look at the work itself as having levels. There's the work at a kind of exoteric level, which you could say consists of this material, books, teachings, exercises, you could say in a way that's all exoteric material. It's material that exists, you could say, on the exoteric plane. It's kind of external. You come into contact with it from outside. And you could say, in a way, it's all based in generalities. Like say, there's these set of exercises or these set of ideas, which, regardless of the individuality of the student, you all come across, you could say, the same body of work in terms of the exercises and the ideas that are there. So that's the kind of, you could say the exoteric level, and you can take on those exercises and start practicing them. But again, there's that question of how can you make it your own? And I mean, when I say make it your own, I mean it more than just like what I said with doing physical exercises. I don't just mean, well, I'd start doing them, but how can I find my own way? Because you could say in a way, everybody, in one sense, is a master or is a genius. Everybody has their own genius. I mean, in a way, everybody's a genius at being themselves. In the same way that you could say we all have an individual essence, or we all have these like higher centers. But the question becomes, how can I like manifest them? How can I realize? It's like a seed. We all have a seed that's got this potential. But what is it in the seed that the different? We can have a bag of seed and we can plant all the seed, but some seeds maybe flower and some doesn't. So what is it in terms of the individual that could make them flower? How that's something unique. In a way, it's a matter between each individual and themselves. It's not like a case of anybody else that's going to be able to make that happen for me. Again, we can learn things and have valid contributions from other people, but you could say in a way it's like it's between each person and themselves, or like traditionally speaking, you might say it's between each person and God or something like that. In terms of how can their own unique potential come to be realized?
How do you want to be?
Yeah, well, yeah, you could say in a way that you've been given that in a way your own, like the way he talks about it, you have your own individual essence. You're already a particular kind of flower, but there's just like that question of like, well, how can I realize that? What kind of flower you could say I am, or like what he talks about the essence, like coming to know your essence, so then that you can, in knowing it, you could say you know what it needs. Or like what I said with that natural intelligence, you could say there's something in us, like the higher centers that already know. You could say what we need, if you like, to fulfill our potential. But how can we connect with that? And in a way, that's always going to be unique to each individual. How they find their own way. So again, like the idea that there's a set sort of way for everybody is kind of a bit of a mechanical way of looking at it. Or the idea that like development's going to look the same for each person. It could look completely different. Doesn't have to look any set way. I mean, of course, there are all these ideas that people can have about what like an enlightened being, should look like. But in a way, they're kind of, you could say they're kind of childish ideas in a way, because it's like, oh well, we ought to. There's that just this picture of what an enlightened being looked like, and they'd all be the same. But that
No,
what you could
they're
say,
all
well, what
different.
yeah, if you
Yeah.
imagine them all just, all, beaming with light and just, doing, it, you could say it would be dead, but just in another way. Yeah, it might be like people might be walking around with smiles on their face all the time, and there might not be any like, conflict or anything, but you could say in a way that would be quite an undramatic or uninteresting world. It's like some of the simple ideas of heaven that people are just sitting on the clouds and being nice to each other. I mean, that would be, in one way that would be very nice. There'd be no,
Do you
no
remember Vic
argument.
Reeves? Do you remember Vic Reeves? He used to say, "I'm naive but happy."
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
That's
in
why I
one
was
way that would,
laughing. I was just giggling away.
yeah, in one way that idea of heaven would be nice, but it could also perhaps be quite, possibly depending on the kind of person that, let's say, that you were, but could be quite boring or not have much vitality to it. So again, like you know, lots of people can have ideas about wanting to make the world a better place, you know, but again, perhaps the idea of the utopia that people have is not wouldn't be fulfilling, you know. It wouldn't have the vitality of life, you know. Like again, life has why life you could say has a certain vitality to it is because it can be messy. You know, I mean, just look at the life, even look at life in terms of the animal kingdom, you know, there's also, you know, there's disease and there could be, you know, death, obviously. I mean, that's part of life, and it's not all necessarily on the surface fun and games, but that's what part of what provides its charm. You know, the material world, like the world of rocks, you could say is quite peaceful. You know, rocks don't seem to have arguments with other rocks, and they don't seem to be killing other rocks. But you know, that's part of its charm, but that's also part of its limitation.
There are
So I'm just saying,
trolls out there.
well, they would be living, wouldn't they? And so that again, that would be where the element of kind of, you know, vitality and hazard comes into it. So again, I'm just saying that, like, yeah, some of the ideas of what like an awakened person, let's say, then would be like, can be quite naive. And one of the ways that they're naive is because they don't allow for any individuality.
Mm.
You know, it's like in a way the individual can never be accounted for. How can you account for an individual? Because to be an individual means to be, you know, in a way to be unique. In that sense, an individual can't really be put into a system,
Yeah.
can't be predicted. And in one sense, like in Beelzebub's tales, that's kind of like you could say what he's getting at with the tale of like the higher powers. You know, they operate on the earth, you know, to try to make things you could say better, but they end up just fucking up. Like with his example with the Kunda buffer, you know, they're like, oh well, we need to do this to make the situation right. They put the Kunda buffer in. Okay, yeah, it seems effective. They take it out, and then all this shit kicks off. You know, and you could say why they fail in that sense is because they can only operate, they can only look at people en masse,
Mhm.
you know. So again, like any system, it only speaks in terms of generalities, you know. And again, there is a certain sameness between every human being to a certain point, but as soon as we come to the idea of individuality, like what is unique to you, there is no system out there that can deal with that, because a system, again, it presupposes a kind of generality. You know, you can't
Yeah,
have
herd
no system.
mentality.
Yeah, there's no system that can account for an individual, and in that sense, there's no system that can create individuals, because what you can't just like mass produce, you know, put people into the same machine and then they'll pop out as an individual. You know, again, that would just be like a mechanical process. You know, so that's what I'm saying. That like, yeah, that you could say that the most important or the most valuable aspect of like self-transformation or alchemy is the individual aspect. It's whatever is going to be unique, you know, to you. And again, you could say, look at the three forces. He says that they're a means like for creativity, you know, and the creativity of something really new. And he says that human beings can be like that. They can have their own sort of law of three, can be realized in them. And it's that law of three that makes them like made in the image of God. So you could say that there's a potential there for their real, something real to themselves, a real individual, real unique, and real unique creativity. You know, so again, that can't be produced from the outside and can't be made just by following any set practices or techniques. You know, so again, that's where a lot of the like ideas of the schools and groups fall down, is because they're all based generally upon repeating the same things. We do these exercises, we study these books, and it all plays out with the same form that repeats itself. Again, it's not saying that there isn't a certain value to that at a certain level. You know, certain things can be learned, but it only in a way feeds the side of man that is in common with others, the general side of man, you know, the man in generality. But it's, when we get to the individual level, that's individual, you know, that can't be predicted, and they can only be found within, you know. So like there's lots of teachings or statements in religion, like, you know, you be your own Buddha, be the Buddha for yourself, you know, or the kingdom of God is within.
Mm.
You know, that's like I say, it's kind of a matter between you and yourself. You know, again, real I. Well, who's gonna be able to tell you what real I is? You know, in a way, it's going to be a matter between you and yourself to, you could say, to find that out, or maybe even to decide for yourself what it is. You know, again, if there's no opportunity for your contribution, there's nothing for you to do.
Right.
You know?
Yes. I used to have a sticker on my top box of my motorbike saying, "You are unique, just like everybody else."
Yeah, yeah.
And I
So
want to
that's
remind everybody that you are all unique, like everybody else. But with that uniqueness, it's just like what Josh is saying, you have the chance to go and be that star, be that plant, be that acorn, was the one that Gurdjieff used to say, was it? Just suddenly remembered, how many acorns fall from a oak tree, how many of them turn into oak trees?
yeah.
You've got that opportunity to be the oak tree. I'm going to say thank you very much, Josh, because we're going to run out of
Okay.
time. But remind everyone of where your WordPress is.
Well, on the WordPress site, if you type in Gurdjieff and Beelzebub, like one word, I think that should take you to the site. The title of the site is just the tapestry of Beelzebub's tales, Gurdjieff, and the work.
Have you got anything else planned for Gurdjieff work at the moment, or is it just the WordPress? Any books
Uh,
out?
no, not yet. I mean, a few people have been in touch about trying to possibly publish some of the stuff that I've written, but nothing has manifested or actualized it as yet. I mean, it'd be a case of me having to edit it, and just not looking forward to that. So it hasn't happened
No,
yet.
I don't like doing editing either of my own stuff, but then maybe we'll have
If
to
there's,
swap over or something.
if there's a keen editor out there that put out the call,
So that
somebody who
call is
enjoys
there,
it.
people. Get in touch with Josh if you're a good editor and a keen editor.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can leave a message on the WordPress site and it will come into my email, so that would be one way to get in contact.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Josh. It's been brilliant.
Okay. Oh, good.
You unique star, you.
Yes.
And I want to thank everybody for watching. You are all unique stars as well. And until next time, we shall fly to the sun absolute again soon. Thank you, Josh. And best to you
Thank you.
all.